I need a man who makes me feel proud the moment he walks into a room, my fiancée said while introducing her wealthy friend to everyone except me at her birthday party. I left without complaining. Months later, she walked into a corporate event and realized every important person already knew my name. I need a man who makes me feel proud the moment he walks into a room. The words landed in the middle of her birthday party like something dropped from a great height. Conversations didn't stop all at once. They sort of dissolved, one by one, the way lights go out in a building after hours. Someone near the kitchen laughed at something, not realizing yet that the air in the living room had changed. Then they realized. Then they stopped too. Marlo was standing near the fireplace, a glass of Prosecco tilted at a practiced angle, her dress the exact shade of gold that photographs well. She was smiling. That was the thing I kept coming back to later. She was smiling when she said it. Not cruel, not calculated, just comfortable. Like she'd been thinking it for so long that saying it out loud felt like relief. I was standing 8 feet away. She didn't look at me. What happened next lasted maybe 4 minutes. Felt longer. She turned toward the doorway where Tripp had just arrived. Tripp, who had the kind of entrance that seemed to come with its own soundtrack. He was wearing a watch that caught the light before he did. Dark blazer, open collar, the easy confidence of someone who has never once worried about a parking ticket. He was laughing at something before he'd even fully walked in. The way people laugh when they know the room is already theirs. Marlo lit up. "Everyone," she said, her voice carrying that particular pitch she used when she wanted to be heard without seeming like she was trying to be heard. "This is Tripp." She walked him around the room. "Tripp, this is my college roommate Bree. Tripp, this is Marcus, he works in tech. Tripp, this is my cousin Delia, she just got back from Florence." Each introduction came with a small touch on the arm, a leaning in, a warmth I recognized because I had been on the receiving end of it once. She introduced him to everyone in that room. Everyone except me. I stood there with a glass of sparkling water. I'd been trying to cut back on drinking during the Project Crunch, and I watched my fiancée walk her new wealthy friend through every person at her birthday party and simply not arrive at me. Not skip me, exactly. More like I had become part of the furniture. A lamp she'd stopped seeing. I didn't say anything. I set my glass down on the bookshelf near the window, found my coat on the rack by the door, and left. No scene. No confrontation. No dramatic pause in the doorway. I just left. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Months later, that same sentence would destroy her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 32. Marlo was 30. We had been together for 5 years, engaged for 11 months, living in a one-bedroom in Murray Hill that we'd always said was temporary, a placeholder until things settled. The apartment was fine. Clean lines, good light in the mornings, close enough to the subway that neither of us needed a car. I owned one anyway, a 6-year-old Accord I kept in a garage on 34th, but Marlo had stopped mentioning it in conversation around the time Tripp started appearing in her social circle. I worked in finance. Private equity, technically, though I never led with that because the moment you say private equity at a dinner party, you either clear the room or attract the wrong kind of attention. I joined the firm, Aldridge Capital, 7 years ago as an analyst, quietly survived 3 leadership transitions, and had spent the last 2 years as a senior associate working on a project I genuinely could not discuss with anyone outside the building. Confidentiality agreements have teeth. I respected that. The problem with confidentiality, I would come to understand, is that silence looks identical to failure from the outside. Marlo and I had built something real. At the beginning, I mean. She was sharp, funny in a dry way that could catch you off guard, and she had a talent for making any space feel intentional. Flowers in odd places, candles at dinner on a Tuesday. She worked in brand consulting, which suited her because she understood instinctively how things appeared and cared deeply about the gap between appearance and reality. In the early years, she seemed to find my quietness interesting. I think she read it as depth. At some point, I still can't identify exactly when, she started reading it as absence. The first signs were small enough to dismiss. She mentioned Tripp's car once, casually, the way you'd mention the weather. He just got one of those Porsches, the new SUV. Apparently the waiting list is insane. I nodded. She mentioned it again a week later. Then she mentioned that he'd been featured in some startup press profile, and she showed me the photo on her phone. Tripp in a leather chair in a glass-walled office, looking like an advertisement for something aspirational. He built that whole company from basically nothing, she said, and there was something in her voice I didn't fully examine at the time. She started asking questions that had a shape I recognized, but couldn't name yet. Are you going to push for a promotion this year? Do you have any idea what Phoenix is planning for the team restructure? Did you hear about the guy from Goldman who left to start his own fund? He's 31. I'd answer honestly. I wasn't sure. I couldn't discuss internal planning. I'd heard something vague. And she'd go quiet in a way that used to mean thoughtfulness, but it started to mean something else. Dax noticed before I did. Dax was my closest friend, had been since we met during our first week at the firm, though he'd since moved to a competing fund downtown. He was precise about people in the way that some analysts are precise about numbers. He tracked behavior, patterns, inconsistencies. He had tried to like Marlo, genuinely tried, but he once told me, carefully, that she reminded him of a client who only calls when the market is up. She's comparing you, he said over lunch one afternoon in November, a month before the birthday party. We were at a place near Rockefeller Center he liked for the noise level, loud enough that no one nearby could follow a conversation. Not obviously, but she's doing it. Everyone compares, I said. Not like this. He moved his fork. She's not measuring you against a standard. She's measuring you against a specific person. And that person isn't you. I told him he was reading too much into it. He gave me the look he reserved for clients who ignored risk assessment. The overheard conversation happened on a Thursday. I'd come home earlier than expected. The meeting had ended at 6 instead of 8. A minor miracle. And Marlo was on the phone in the bedroom with the door half open. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was just home, and sound travels in a Murray Hill one-bedroom regardless of your intentions. He's a good guy, she was saying. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's talking to her friend Kara. Looser, less edited. He's genuinely a good guy. But nobody notices him, you know? Like, we'll go somewhere and nobody. I just don't feel. A pause. Proud. I don't feel proud. Is that terrible? I know that's terrible. But Tripp walked into that benefit last week and people they respond to him. That's all I'm saying. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at its contents for a long time without taking anything out. I didn't bring it up. I've thought about why many times since, and the most honest answer I have is this. I wasn't ready for the conversation it would have started. And somewhere beneath that, I think I already knew how it ended. What Marlo didn't know, what almost no one outside the firm knew, was what I had been working on for the better part of 18 months. Aldrich Capital had been quietly building toward a major acquisition. I can't give you the name of the target company, even now, though it's been public for a while. What I can tell you is the scale. 8 figures in the initial structure, with downstream implications that touched 4 different industry sectors. Phoenix, our senior partner, the one who had hired me and had, over 7 years, become something close to a mentor, had assigned me as the primary analyst on the deal's structural design. Not because I was the most senior person available, because I had spent 3 years understanding the specific regulatory environment that made the deal possible, and Phoenix trusted me not just with the numbers, but with the judgment calls that numbers alone can't answer. I was in the office until 10, 11, sometimes 1 in the morning. I was quiet at dinner when I made it home for dinner. I was distracted in the ways that people are distracted when they are carrying something large, and cannot put it down and cannot explain why they're carrying it. To Marlo, I imagine it looked like stagnation. A man going nowhere slowly. The deal closed the first week of December. I wasn't allowed to celebrate publicly. I went to a bar with Dax, who knew enough to know something significant had happened, and we had 2 drinks and didn't talk about it, and that was enough. Phoenix sent me an email at 11:47 that night. 3 sentences. The last one said, I want to discuss your path to partnership in January. I read it 4 times. I didn't tell Marlo. Not because I didn't want to, but because by December I had started to understand that some part of my relationship had quietly become a place where good news didn't feel safe. The photos appeared on a Saturday. Marlo had gone to a dinner. She'd mentioned it as a work-adjacent thing, which was a category she'd invented to describe events I wasn't invited to. I'd been fine with that, mostly. Her work involved a certain amount of social performance that I didn't have the energy for on a Saturday after a week like the one I'd had. I saw the photos because Dax texted me a screenshot at 9:30. No message, just the image. Marlo and Tripp at what appeared to be a private dining room somewhere. Dark wood, candles, the kind of curation that announces itself. She was laughing at something he'd said. He had his arm around the back of her chair in a way that was technically not her shoulder, but was adjacent to it in a way that comments had clearly noticed, because when I went to look at the actual post, The comments included things like "finally," and "you too," and one that just said a series of emojis I declined to enumerate. I sat with my phone for a while. Then I put it face down on the coffee table and watched the rest of the basketball game I'd had on in the background. I know how that sounds. But anger takes energy I didn't have. And something in me, the part that had spent 7 years learning to read a situation correctly before responding to it, was already telling me that what I was looking at was a symptom, not the disease. When Marlo got home, I didn't mention the photos. She didn't mention them either. We moved around each other in that apartment with the particular careful choreography of two people who have agreed, without saying so, to defer something. Dax met me for coffee the following week and didn't bother with preamble. "You know people are talking about you," he said. "What people?" "Industry people. The Harmon deal. Don't look at me like that. Nobody knows the details, but people know something significant closed at Aldridge, and your name is coming up in rooms you've never been in." He stirred his coffee. "I was at a thing on Tuesday. 2 managing directors from separate firms both mentioned you. Not asked about you. Mentioned you. Like you were already part of the furniture." I looked at him. "Good furniture," he said. "Important furniture." I told him that was strange to hear. "Get used to it," he said. "Phoenix has been talking to people. I don't know what he's been saying, but whatever it is, it's working." He paused. "Does Marlo know any of this?" I was quiet for a moment. "No," I said. Dax looked at me with an expression that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite frustration. Somewhere in between. The look of someone watching a friend fail to read a situation that he himself had already fully mapped. "She's going to find out eventually," he said. "I know. I'm just saying." "I know, Dax." He let it go. That was one of the things I valued most about him. He knew when to let it go. The arguments started in earnest in January. Not screaming arguments. Marlo wasn't a screamer. She was a presser, someone who returned to the same point from different angles until the point was impossible to ignore. She pressed on my hours, my vagueness, my apparent lack of urgency about our future. She pressed on the apartment, which she'd started calling temporary with a particular emphasis that made the word mean something different than it used to. "I just feel like you're comfortable being invisible," she said one evening. We were in the kitchen. I was making pasta. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, not because she was angry, but because that was how she stood when she was working something out. "Like you've decided that's enough. Being competent and quiet, and just there." "I'm not invisible," I said. "You know what I mean." "I'm not sure I do." She exhaled. "When was the last time someone was excited to meet you? Like genuinely, when you walked into a room?" "Marlo, I'm being honest." "I know you are." There was a long pause. I stirred the pasta. The water was boiling harder than it needed to. "I don't want a man who hides in the background," she said, quietly enough that it almost sounded like she was saying it to herself. I turned off the burner. "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm working." "Working on what?" "You never tell me anything." "You never," she stopped. "Tripp closed a deal last month, and he had a dinner for it. He invited people. He celebrated. He made it visible. That's what I mean. Not the money. Just the visibility." And there it was. Finally correctly named. It wasn't about money. It had never really been about money. It was about image. About the sensation of being adjacent to someone that other people saw. She wanted to feel the room shift when her partner walked in. She wanted to be standing next to someone whose success had a public face. I had been so focused on the work that I had failed to understand that the work, to her, was invisible. And maybe, in some quiet way, she was right that I hadn't fought very hard to make it visible to her. But there is a difference between not advertising yourself and hiding. And I was not hiding. I had simply made a choice, a long time ago, to let the work speak and to trust that the people who needed to hear it would. The problem was that Marlo wasn't one of those people anymore. The engagement ended on a Tuesday in late January. No particular reason for a Tuesday. It wasn't a fight, or a final ultimatum, or a revelation. It was more like a conclusion that had been slowly reaching itself and finally arrived. We were on the couch. She had been talking about a friend's engagement party she wanted to attend, about what we would say to people when they asked about our own timeline, about something Tripp had posted that had gotten significant attention. She was talking and I was listening, and at some point during the listening I understood with complete clarity that I was no longer the person she was talking to. I was a surface she was talking at. "I need to say something," I said. She stopped. "I don't think we're doing each other any good anymore." The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of recognition. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and something passed between us that was almost, in a strange way, kind. Like two people finally agreeing to stop pretending. Is this about? It's not about anyone specific, I said. It's about us. About what we want. I think we want different things. She was quiet for a long time. Maybe, she finally said. I took off the ring from its place on the chain I'd been wearing it on. I didn't wear it on my hand at work. It wasn't the environment, and I set it gently on the coffee table. No speech. No recrimination. I didn't list her failures or defend my own choices. There was no point. Verdicts rendered in anger have a way of clarifying less than they promise, and I was not angry. I was tired, and I was sad in a way that sat low and quiet, and I was already, somewhere beneath all of it, beginning to exhale. I moved out over the following weekend. Dax helped me carry boxes. You okay? He asked, on the second trip down. Yeah, I said. You don't have to be. I know. I shifted the box in my arms. But I am. 8 months passed. I don't have a neat way to describe those months because they weren't neat. They were full and complicated and, underneath all of it, genuinely good in ways I hadn't expected. The partnership conversation with Phoenix moved forward in March. By May, I had a title that reflected, for the first time, something close to what I had actually been doing for the past 2 years. By June, Aldridge's name was appearing in the financial press in ways it hadn't before, and my name was appearing alongside it, quietly, in the kinds of columns that serious people in the industry read and most people outside it never see. I moved into a new apartment, a 2-bedroom in Tribeca, high floor, the kind of light Marlo had always said she wanted, and I furnished it slowly, the way I did most things, with more care than urgency. I bought a new car, same brand as before, newer model, still not flashy, still just a car. I ate well. I slept enough. I worked the same long hours I had always worked, but now there was a clarity to them that felt different. Like I was no longer proving something. Like I was simply doing the thing I was built to do. Dax came over in July and stood at the window looking out at the Hudson and said, "You know you should enjoy this more than you do." I enjoy it, I said. You appreciate it. That's different. I thought about that. Maybe, I said. You need to come to the Harrison Gala, he said, turning from the window. Phoenix already told me he wants you there. It's a big room. A lot of people who should meet you. I'd been avoiding large events. Not strategically. I just genuinely preferred smaller rooms. But Phoenix had mentioned the gala twice, and I respected Phoenix's instincts about these things more than my own preferences. When is it? I asked. The Harrison Gala was held on a Friday in late September at a hotel in Midtown whose ballroom I had been in twice before, both times as a junior person standing near the edges. The kind of event where the name tags are redundant because everyone already knows everyone, and the ones who don't know everyone yet are either very new or very important. I arrived at 7:15. Dark suit, no tie, the watch my father had given me the year I made associate. Simple, well-made, nothing that announced itself. Sutton from Meridian Capital was the first person I saw when I walked in. She spotted me from across the entrance hall and came over immediately, hand extended. I was hoping you'd be here, she said. Sutton was a year younger than me, one of the sharper executives I'd met in the past 3 years, someone whose opinion I'd come to genuinely value. We'd worked adjacent to each other on 2 deals, never directly, but enough that we'd built something real. I want to introduce you to the Harrington Group people before Phoenix gets to them. I laughed. He'll get to them first regardless. Probably, but it's worth trying. We moved through the room. I'm not going to pretend I didn't notice the quality of the attention. I'm not built for pretense, and this isn't that kind of story. People I knew came over. People I didn't know were introduced to me by people who did. A managing director from a Boston firm I'd spoken to exactly once on a call shook my hand like we were old friends and told the man beside him, without prompting, what I'd done on the Harmon deal. A senior executive from a fund I deeply respected found me at the bar and said he'd been meaning to reach out for weeks. It was the kind of room where you understand, for the first time, the full architecture of what you've been building. I was standing with a group near the far windows, Sutton and 2 investors from a European fund who were in town for the week, when I saw Marlo. She was near the entrance, with a small group I didn't recognize. A corporate social event, I gathered later. Her firm had a client relationship with one of the evening sponsors, and she'd come as part of a professional group. She was wearing something elegant, her hair the way she wore it at events, and she was already scanning the room the way she always did, cataloging, assessing. She didn't see me immediately. I saw the moment she did. It was subtle, a small stillness in her body, a fractional pause in whatever she'd been saying to the woman beside her. Then she was watching, and what she was watching was the man from Meridian, a genuinely important person, someone whose fund managed several $billion, crossing the room not toward his own colleagues, but toward me, stopping our conversation to clasp my hand and say, loudly enough to carry, "There he is. I've been looking for you for the past 20 minutes. I excused myself from the group for a moment and spoke with him. When I returned, Sutton gave me a look that was somewhere between amusement and satisfaction. You have an audience, she said, very quietly. I know, I said. Does it bother you? I considered this honestly. No, I said. The next hour was, I suspect, disorienting for Marlowe in a way I take no pleasure in describing, but will describe accurately, because that's what happened. Phoenix arrived at 8 and moved through the room the way he always did, with the particular gravity of someone who has spent 30 years being the most important person in any professional space he enters. He found me within 10 minutes, which was faster than Sutton had predicted, and he was not subtle about it. I want you to meet someone, he said, and proceeded to introduce me to a group of 4 people, 2 of whom I recognized from financial press coverage, and one of whom I would spend the next 6 months working with closely. In the introduction, Phoenix said things about my work that I would not repeat here, because they would seem self-serving regardless of their accuracy. What I will say is that the room around us had that quality that certain rooms get, a slight reorganization of attention, people angling toward a conversation they want to be part of. At one point I looked up, not intentionally, and saw Marlowe 15 feet away. She was watching Phoenix. Then she was watching the people around me. Then she was watching me. Her expression was the one she wore when she was recalculating something, when information had arrived that required her to revise a position she'd held with certainty. Tripp arrived at some point during all of this. I hadn't known he'd be there. He moved in adjacent circles, startup and tech money with occasional crossover into the institutional world. He walked in with his usual assurance, the watch catching the light, the easy smile. He found people he knew. He had his own conversations, his own small territory of attention. But the room's center of gravity was not with him tonight. I don't say this with satisfaction. I say it because it is true and because it matters to the story, and because the story is not about Tripp. Tripp was, I think, a fundamentally uncomplicated person who had built something real in his own sphere and had the misfortune of being assigned a symbolic role in someone else's disappointment. He didn't deserve what Marlowe made him represent. But tonight, in this room, among these people, nobody was waiting to speak with him. Nobody was crossing the floor to find him, and people were still finding me. Toward the end of the evening, around 9:45, I was standing near the bar speaking with the European investors, a conversation about risk structures I was genuinely enjoying, when I felt a presence at the edge of the group, close but not joining. I finished the sentence I was in the middle of, excused myself, and turned. Marlowe was standing there. She looked, in that moment, like someone who had spent the evening rewriting something they thought they had already finished. She looked, to be honest, like she was trying to figure out where to start. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. You look well. So do you. A pause. The bar noise around us provided the kind of coverage that intimate conversations need in public spaces. I didn't know you'd be here, she said. I wasn't sure I'd come, I said. Last-minute decision. She nodded slowly. Then, I feel like I need to say. Marlowe. No, she stopped. Started again. I was wrong about some things. A lot of things. She looked at the floor briefly, then back at me. I think I made a serious mistake in how I saw you. Who you were. I was looking for something visible, and I didn't see what was right. You didn't miss something hidden, I said. I wasn't hiding anything. I just wasn't performing. She absorbed that. I know, she said. That's what I mean. A pause. I'd like to start over. If there's any part of you that would consider. There isn't, I said. Not harshly. Not coldly. Flatly. In the way that flat things are true. Something shifted in her expression. She had known, I think, what the answer was likely to be. But knowing a thing and hearing it said are different experiences. Okay, she said quietly. I hope things are good for you, I said. Genuinely. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she nodded, a small, composed nod, the kind that takes something, and stepped back and folded back into the room. I returned to the European investors, who were deep into a discussion about a regulatory shift in one of their home markets that had the potential to open significant new structures for American funds. It was an interesting conversation. I was genuinely present for it. Somewhere behind me, I knew Marlowe was watching. I didn't look back. Weeks later, in the quiet of the Tribeca apartment, with the Hudson doing whatever the Hudson does at 11 on a weeknight. I thought about what I would say if someone asked me whether I had wanted her to see all of that. Whether the evening had felt like vindication. The honest answer is that it felt like nothing so uncomplicated as vindication. Vindication requires a wound still open, and whatever wound Marlowe had left had closed, not by force, not through discipline, but through the natural process of time and work and a life that had kept moving forward without waiting for any particular person's recognition. What it felt like, I think, was completion, a sentence reaching its period. She had wanted a man who made her feel proud the moment he walked into a room. She had looked at me, standing quietly in my ordinary clothes with my ordinary car and my silences and my confidentiality agreements, and she had decided I was not that man. She was not entirely wrong to look. She was wrong about what she saw. I thought about the birthday party, the fireplace, the Prosecco, the practiced angle of her glass. Tripp arriving with his watch catching the light. Her voice carrying the names of everyone in the room except mine. I thought about leaving without a word. I thought about how different it looks, from the outside, when someone walks out of a room quietly, how easily it reads as retreat, how rarely it occurs to anyone watching that the person leaving might simply have somewhere else to be. I was in a meeting 3 weeks after the gala when Phoenix stopped in the doorway on his way to somewhere else and said, to no one in particular, he was the most important person in the room before anyone knew it. That's the hardest thing to be. Takes a certain kind of person. He was talking about a case study, a historical deal. He wasn't talking about me. But Sutton caught my eye from across the table, and the corner of her mouth moved in the particular way that things sometimes go when the world decides, briefly, to be a little more precise than usual. I went back to the documents in front of me. There was work to do. She wanted a man people noticed when he entered a room. She never realized they were already standing when I did.